Good afternoon and welcome again to my Gospel Giant family. Let me extend a hearty thank you first before we get started with the show to all of you that come back every Saturday to join me in this moment to listen in to what we have to say and what we present at this table. And as always, I'm encouraging you to stay safe and to use those necessary precautions to stay safe, like wearing your mask. Make sure that you are physically distancing yourselves, and when you can avoid being in large crowds, do that. And please, as I always say, get tested. And if you don't know where to get tested, you can contact your local health department and they can steer you in the right direction. I've been focusing on race relations here lately, and last week we kind of shifted the focus a little bit and we talked about pastoring in a pandemic, because that is another area how we have begun to approach worship that COVID-19 has impacted. It swept across our land in what just seems like, an insurmountable fashion, and we've transitioned into a world where people are just, there's loss of life, loss of income, and there have just been so many negative impacts of COVID-19. And one of those things is school. And as a parent, a grandparent, students, teachers, all of these people are impacted in some type of way. And I think we've just paid the price that we've paid with COVID-19 is just eye-watering to me. Yet it is increasingly clear that the virus is really going to have a huge impact on the younger population as we start thinking about how we're going to approach education. Some believing that children should get back into the school setting, into the regular classroom setting. Others feeling that there's dangers attached to them being in the school setting. Districts around the world are having to decide whether children are going to learn in the classroom or whether they're going to take a virtual approach to learning. What should we do? How should we do it? And when should we do it? Well, we're going to talk about it right here, right now, with this great panel of folks that I have with me here today. Hello, and thanks to all of you for agreeing to be here with me today. I appreciate it so much. And I'm eager to hear your perspectives on how we should approach reentry to schools. Um, I want you to just tell our listening audience who you are and give a little bit of your background. Since we have this great young man on the panel, I'm gonna ask you, Trey, if you would just jump in and tell us who you are and give a little background, and if Mrs. Watkins would follow, please.
All righty. Well, I'm Trey Cunningham. I'm a student at Haywood High School. I also serve as the a council member for the Education Trust of Tennessee, as a policy council member for P12 education, and they do a little bit of advocating for education rights and things like that. I'm a member of the NAACP. I'm involved with them. And I'm really, really involved with my school system, Haywood County Schools. I serve as a captain in our ROTC program and the director of communications for that program as well. That's me on the professional side. And so that's kind of what I do here in Haywood.
Thank you, Trey. Miss Watkins, Mrs. Watkins, I apologize.
That's okay. Hi, my name is Civil Miller Watkins. I am a parent, grandparent of public school children. I am on the school board of Fayette County Public Schools. I have been very involved in opening our schools back up. And full disclosure, I am also running for office
Yes,
for Tennessee State Senate
for District.
26.
Thank you. Francine.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm actually Civil Sister, and I am with Fayette County Schools. I teach and I have a son in Fayette County Schools, and I graduated from, well, one was Memphis State in '92, and I've been teaching different places all over the United States, from California to North Carolina to Georgia, and of course here in Tennessee. Um, So, and I've done a lot of different classroom, just teacher things all over, pre-K, adults, everybody in between I've been teaching.
Yeah.
And I have a college student and a sixth grader. So, and I taught all of those and I've tutored or something, been dealing with them. So I have teaching extensive background.
Yeah. Thank you. And Meredith,
Mhm.
could you tell us a little bit about who you are, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Meredith Rucker. My background originally is in journalism. I transitioned into education a little over a decade ago. So I worked in back then Memphis City schools for about a year. I taught in the classroom for a year at Manassas, and then I spent some time in the background in the Office of Pre-K through 12 Innovations and Reform. I've spent about a decade in higher education. So I've worked at Southwest Tennessee Community College, and I also worked at LeMoyne College for about 6 years. I'm currently working at Bridges as the Director of Program Development. So that's where I am now. I have 2 sons. I have a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old.
Wow, I can't even remember that. I just don't get it. I can't, other than these grandbabies I got running around here. Uh, so guys, what's your perspective? What's your perspective on the schools reopening? Where do we really go from here? What are your thoughts? Because it was just a couple of weeks ago that Shelby County Schools here was talking about parents having the option of doing virtual school versus, or some could, come to the classroom. And now, not long after that, they've come back and said school is definitely going to be virtual. What do you think?
Well, from a student perspective of schools reopening, I think that it is necessary for us to go back to school at some point, especially for grade levels like, pre-K through maybe third grade, because that's like foundational grade levels. As far as, going on up into high school and middle school and things like that, I think it's really important, but it just is how we plan to go back. And that's going and following the mandates that have been set forth by the government, following CDC guidelines, World Health Organization. So I think that's where I feel as my perspective on us reopening schools.
Do you think that those guidelines that you speak of, do you think that's really going to be the challenging part though? Because I
I
mean,
I honestly think so. I was talking to some parents about lower grade levels like pre-K. That they like to play, and they were talking about kids maybe trading masks, things like that, and they're not going to be able to function as they need to under all of those precautionary guidelines and things like that. So they're not understanding we're going through a global pandemic right now, and they're just going off what they're going off what they're being told by adults, like wash your hands, make sure you have a mask on, and so that's going to be the hard part, I think so.
Civil, I would really love to hear what kinds of conversations are going on, with the school boards, and not, I mean, just from that perspective, because I would suspect those discussions may sound a little different.
Well, as far as your school boards are concerned, one thing that we had to deal with was we really couldn't plan effectively until our CARES Act money came into our bank accounts. And so from March till about May, we were trying to figure out how to best educate our children at the spur of the moment. So a lot of our parents were very disillusioned by how we had to roll out educating our students between March and May. And they were kind of leery about what the school district could do to educate our children in August. So we had several different fronts that we had to confront. The one was parents not feeling very good about how schooling ended the previous year. Second, funding. Your school board is all about balancing a budget, yet educating our children to the best of our ability. And thirdly, in order to open our schools, I can speak for Fayette County, we decided to use the EpiCurve numbers. Those numbers are the numbers that decide if visitors can be in a nursing home, and they have certain parameters. And so we use the EpiCurve to decide how we would open our schools. And so we decided to open virtually. We're fully remote, every student, and with that came the lack of broadband. You know, you have to cross the digital divide. Then you have to be concerned with our students being able to have devices, hotspots, all of those types of things. And then you had to train your teachers. So the decisions that school board members and districts had to make, superintendents had to make, involved not just one aspect, because we had to think about, we got to feed our children, because schools are still having to feed the children. How does schooling look? So school systems and superintendents, and I just want to take a moment to uplift those superintendents and those school boards that had to make these very challenging decisions, because no one has ever opened a school district during a pandemic, not only during a pandemic, but without statewide guidelines. You know, written down, everybody does this, and then you move on. And instead, what we have is, here's what the CDC says, pick and choose what you want, basically, and open your schools. So it has been challenging.
Yeah, it's so much entailed that I think a lot of us, you know, wouldn't necessarily see. Meredith, would you weigh in on that?
Yeah, so originally I thought when the original plan was to give parents the option between having students come to class in person versus virtually, I personally thought that it was a good offer. And I say that based on my thoughts about some children in their home circumstances. And so in my mind, I thought giving parents the option to send students in was a good thing, because the honest fact of the matter is, even in a pandemic, some students just are not safer at home. You know, they may be faced with, you know, issues that are difficult, or environments that are difficult for them to be in. And so school is a safe place or a safe haven for those students. And for that reason, and also for the reason for the parents who, you know, do not have, you know, other childcare or options, or family or a community that they can lean on, or a place for their children to be during the day while they have to work. For those reasons, I thought the option of doing in-person or virtual was a good idea. I understand the decision to go completely virtual. And I think that considering the numbers that we're seeing, it absolutely makes sense. I do wish that, you know, it concerns me for the parents who don't have options, but at the end of the day, I mean, it is the responsibility of you know, the parent or the caregiver to figure out options for their children. I think sometimes we place a little bit too much responsibility on the school system. And so for that reason, you know, I support the idea of going virtual, even though I know that there are some parents and some families who, you know, could really use the in-person option. I agree that I can't imagine it's, you know, having to make those kinds of decisions. I think the point about the lack of leadership at a state and at a national level is a great point, because that's something that's just missing. And I guess the last thing that I will say is one of my other big concerns was for the teachers, to be honest. And I'm a parent, and, you know, I just think that we ask so much of our educators and we give them so little in return, in my opinion. And so you know, the thought of teachers and educators having, you know, one more thing on their plate, and this being a huge thing, to deal with, and that takes away from actual instruction time and learning for the children, I think is a huge ask of our instructors and our teachers to now sort of mitigate the risks of their students contracting, COVID. I think it's asking a lot. It's asking too much, in my opinion, especially not giving them the resources that they need. I know teachers right now who are buying, things to make their classes COVID safe, who are having to buy their own cleaning supplies. And I mean, it's absurd. And so, I'm happy that that's one less thing that the teachers will have to tackle, being in classroom. Now, I do think that there will be challenge. I mean, of course, there are going to be challenges with the students learning virtually. There's a learning curve, and there's also resources that I think that teachers and parents need to help prepare their students to learn, in a virtual environment. But I really think that we are at a time in history that we probably will not see again for a while. This is like a once or twice in a lifetime opportunity to really kind of revamp and revolutionize the education system. I think is long overdue. And so I think that I hope that we take this time to come up with some really great innovative changes that will benefit our educators and our students. So, I hope we take that opportunity. There'll be a learning curve, but I think there's, on the positive side of things, there's great opportunity to do some things in very new and different ways that can be beneficial.
Yeah. I mean, these are unprecedented times, and we understand that. And we're in times, everything's unfamiliar. And I feel like they've made so many accommodations, if you will, for so many other things. So I'm hoping that when you mentioned, and I was just having a conversation with someone about that today, the children, that school is their safe haven. And, hopefully we're going to think through these things, right? And think through the funding, piece of it, or whatever, or what have you. As Civil spoke about, waiting on the funds. You can't plan until you have the dollars, to pay for these things. Francine, would you kind of weigh in as well? Because I know you're that teacher and parent.
Yes. The teachers have been back. This is going on our second week of being back, and just watching. And we've been talking about how we're going to do virtual, of course, because our school system is doing virtual the first 4.5 weeks, but we're also trying to get back with after Labor Day. How are we going to enter back into the building? If we're going to enter back into the building. And we had a state of the schools today, and our temporary interim superintendent made that reassuring point to me, is that she was going to look at the data and not just look at other things, because that assures me as a parent and a teacher. I'm going to be in the classroom with in our county. We do have people who do not want to wear masks, and they do not want their children to wear masks in the building. They don't want to do that. And so we have to, as a teacher, I have to deal with that. Then I have to decide, what am I going to do with my own child in that environment? And we're also, we talked to the guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor is dealing with us as teachers, as well as looking at the parents. As teachers, we have to look at what the parents might be thinking and what they might want, and how that will impact the children that are coming in and how they are going to behave. Now, I teach middle school, and middle school is actually, they can be a lot less cooperative than pre-K. Pre-K can be very cooperative. They're there, they're ready to learn, and you can get them in a line very easily. But middle schoolers have a whole lot of other things. They at pre-K-ish in big bodies, and they have a lot of, they think, experience with
That's
the
true.
world.
I taught middle school. That's very true.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it will actually be a lot harder for middle schoolers and maybe even high schoolers, but especially middle schoolers,
To conform. Yeah.
to adhere to any kind of guidelines. Um, and that's just the nature of being a middle schooler.
Mhm.
And my concern as a parent and a teacher for me, I've always been concerned with discipline in the schools. And how are we going to discipline these kids? Are we going to have the police come and take them away because they're being children? Because that is what has happened before. You know, you have the police officers in there, they're like, well, you are committing, you know, some really big crime. You're getting somebody sick, or somebody going to sue you as a parent. I mean, a lot of crazy things have happened. And then coming in and we're putting a lot of on children, and they have, in one aspect, we're saying they're too young to do some things, but yet we will give them the consequences of an adult
Mhm.
for being kids. And so that's and my older child has had adult consequences for being a middle schooler, wrestling too much. And so the police had to come. This is when we were in Georgia. I was like, well, why would they're middle school boys. They're going to wrestle. They're not going to keep their hands off of each other. They're not going to stand in line. And my child, you know, he didn't even know what was going on. He had no clue.
And many of them don't even understand the severity of COVID-19. I mean, let's be real, you know, so it's kind of difficult to even, expect certain things from them. You know what, guys? One of the things that I thought about was, when certain districts were talking about going into the classroom, or like say when Shelby County had the two options, I was thinking, okay, based on what we're doing with COVID, right? If I were to test positive, then I have to quarantine for 2 weeks, 14 days, right? If you were in contact with me, then you're supposed to quarantine too, right? So the whole time I was thinking, like, so every time somebody in a classroom tests positive, they have to quarantine for 2 weeks. You know, what is that going to look like back and forth, back and forth? Because at the rate people are contracting this virus, you know, we're most likely somebody's going to get it, right?
Well, one of my challenges, and I'm also a parent, I have 3 boys who will be in 2 different schools. I have 2 grandsons who will be in the 3rd school here in Fayette County. And then Francine's son, my nephew, will also be in a school. So my challenge with the guidelines was, if one of my sons, you know, is quarantined, don't I need to quarantine all of my children? And then if I'm quarantining all of my children, therefore all of their teachers and all of their classmates would have to quarantine as well. So you're not talking just one person.
Right.
You have to go all the way.
The ripple effect.
Yes, and also I live with my 82-year-old mother-in-law. So now I have my children going to school and they're going to come home. So they say that children, you know, they don't feel the effects of COVID the way that you and I may, but they're great transmitters. And great was probably a terrible word to use right there. They transmit it, you know.
Although they're asymptomatic, they can spread it.
Mm-hmm. And so now I have to deal with all of these people, these 6 students going to school and then coming back home and being with my 82-year-old mother-in-law. And then I'll also say that Francine and I, between the 2 of us, we have 3 college children who we're dropping off at college on August the 13th. And they're at college until November, Thanksgiving. And, you know, so, I mean, it's just, and then if they get quarantined, you know, I won't be able to go see them because they're on campus and there are no visitors in the quarantine dorm area. So it's just a lot. And so thinking about opening, we can't think about just one student. It is school systems are a system, which means there are a lot of different processes and people that go into a school system that can be affected. And when you guys were talking about the fact that we have students who use school as a safe place, that's why a statewide plan would be awesome, because statewide we could have wraparound services that could help us deal with every issue, whether that student has food insecurities, whether they are not secure in their body, in their person, whether they need social, emotional care, whether their parents need social, emotional care. And then also, when I think about teachers, they may also need that social, emotional care. So we must have a statewide plan that will give us that wraparound, so that where schools have become, let me say this, the pandemic has revealed how important public school systems are to our communities. Because they feed, they're safe, they educate, they have people who care for them, they're guidance counselors, there are nurses, there are psychologists, yes, there are speech therapists, there are occupational therapists, there are all these things that our public school system does. And the only way we can make sure that the public school system stays viable is, as Ms. Rucker said, we have to reimagine our educational system and make it come out of this pandemic even better than it was. And I can say that I am a product of Bolivar Central High, and I will never say, I will never say anything negative.
We're done, Trey. We done bragging.
You see, okay. But I just think that we can reimagine and do a complete wraparound so that everyone can be better taken care of during this pandemic.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and we have all these key terms that we like. We've been talking about reimagining education for a while. Now we've been thrown into a situation where we really got to reimagine, education. And when I think about you were just going down the line talking about all the pieces and the people that have been impacted, right? And that will continue to be impacted. And that's what really I'm so concerned about the mental health aspect of it, because yes, some of our children, they really thrive from that social, emotional piece of life, whereas some kids are okay with not necessarily being social all the time. All of the other ripple effects that have happened to us as adults, these teachers, I know some teachers that are over 60 that have actually retired because they don't want to be exposed to this virus, right? So it's just so many moving pieces to it. I want to talk about particularly the economic component of it, because we were talking about childcare and all the things that happen. Let's talk about that when we come back from break. We'll be right back on 94.7 FM. And we're back on 94.7 FM, and we are talking about the reopening of schools across Tennessee, across the nation, and what that looks like or should look like, if it should happen, if it should not happen. I am here with this great panel of folks that are so knowledgeable and have such an experienced background in education. When we left, I was talking about the economic component, and we talked a little bit of how parents are impacted, because I know as a single mom, when I was raising my two, one of the things that I could rely on was not having to pay childcare during the school year, right? I just had to figure it out for the summer. And, and I had to figure out what I was going to do if one of them got sick and I had to, or whatever. And they wasn't, maybe I could still go to work, and if I needed somebody to keep them. But this is a whole new ball game. Talk about that a little bit, Francine.
Well, as far as work, well, I'm a teacher, so my children go to school when I go to school. We were all off during the summer. But I have had a time where I was working during the summer, and my father, my children's father at the time, was also an educator, and he worked out of state while we were in Georgia. And it was a real challenge. And that was my first taste of, oh, this is what everybody that's not a teacher goes through. And because otherwise it would just be me and it wasn't a problem. But when I had to go to work, it was, can I bring them with me, to work? And so one of the reasons I became a pre-K teacher was because I needed to have my child with me to go to work, and having a teaching background that just worked out for the younger one. And I pre-taught, he was in my class because we had to come. And I told we're a package deal. So I know that some of my parents that I've taught just here in Fayette County last year during the school year, how hard it was. And we're rural. And that also opened my eyes up to a whole nother challenge of how hard it is to live in a rural place, because if you need a car, there is no public transportation. You have to have a car to go to the store, to go to work or wherever, get your child. If your child got sick at school and they normally ride the bus, you can't not just say, just let them ride, stay at school and let them ride the bus home sick. You can't do that. So it was a challenge having parents try to find a ride to come to school to get their child for whatever reason. And just calling them and asking them to just come to the school and jump over here, that just wasn't an option for a lot of my parents. You just, and as a teacher, I had to really have compassion for that, really think about, do I need this parent to come here at this particular time? And do I need to have an event at any particular time? With the pandemic, I've had two parents who gave birth right at the beginning of the pandemic, and neither of them had, it would have been the second child. One was a little boy and one was a little girl in my classroom. And those kids had to step up and become adults. So me calling them and asking, is everything okay? No one could come visit the moms in the hospital during the pandemic, so they had to give birth alone. And one of the parents really had a hard time. And because we know that we as Black women, we really go through a lot of postpartum more than other women do. And I had to call the social worker and say, can you go check on this family? And she did. The social worker, I'm not allowed to know what happened, of course, but I know that she did let me know that they went to check on them. So the pandemic has been really wreaking havoc on a lot of our kids, economically, emotionally, just psychologically, and then not having that being able to come to school and have some kind of normalcy. It was, it was not normal to be to go home for a spring break and then not return. So they never, our kids have not returned since spring break. And a lot of our parents have not been working since that time. And so the money hadn't come in, because we keep in touch with our parents. And I really like that our school district encouraged us to keep in touch with our parents as much as possible, to kind of see how they're doing, to do a kind of an unofficial well check, and it was, sometimes it was just talking, but the economic part really, really hurt quite a few of my parents. And I just asked them, I just let them talk to me, and there was no child care. It was just them at home, or they were essential workers, as in they worked at Walmart. So they had to find a place to go and work at the Kroger, because our Walmart and Kroger is in the next county. And we don't have, they weren't working here. We have some here, but our closest ones was in the next county for them.
So
those are jobs that they don't pay that well.
Right.
And they're essential workers, and they didn't get a lot of PPE. They were bringing things home. I've had 3 of my families come down with COVID. Someone in their actual household came down with it. And so, and they were the ones who were out working. So now they're at home. And so that really hurt them a lot. and they were really relying on food from the school system. And they were asking me, when is the next drop for the food and where is it going to be, which meant they had to get in a car, which they may or may not have had, and get to the food.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I mean,
One of the things
economically,
that
it just
one of the pets
impacts everyone.
brought out on the show last week was about the faith-based organizations and how we are finally getting to see the faith-based organizations in action, right? And from the perspective of, food, I'll call them food banks or, people that have lost jobs and how they stepped in to kind of cushion the blow, financially in some way or the other. But I mean, I can just see that whole economic piece being kind of a ripple effect as well. So many different things can happen. Would you speak to it a little for me, Meredith?
Yeah. So again, I think that one of the things this goes back to is like a leadership thing. I completely agree, Civil, with points about wraparound services and really needing those. I do commend the faith community, though. I mean, I think that there are some who have been doing that work for a while. And so this is a time in which they're continuing that work. I think this is also a time where some maybe have not been as involved in the past and are stepping up to get involved. But I think that food insecurity is a huge issue here in our area. And I think that in the past, maybe 3 to 5 years, maybe even longer than that, there's been like a pretty steady and rapid decline of available food source options. And I can speak, I'm from South Memphis, so I can speak specifically about our area and the not restaurants, the grocery stores and food options that that area has lost in the last several years. There are some organizations who are trying to do work to kind of provide fresh food options for that area. There's a South Memphis Farmers Market. I know there's Memphis Tilth that does work. There's some other nonprofit organizations who are trying to fill in that space, similar to how the faith community is. But I think it's one of those things that it's going to take it's going to take the faith community. It's going to take our elected officials to get involved, to allocate funds to those things. And I mean, it's kind of sad that, it's not an automatic. It's not something that, it shouldn't be something that you have to fight for, really. But that's kind of the situation that we're in. And so, but I do think that right now we're in a time where there's the option where you can provide things for people to help them, get through. But then there's also the option of, it's the idea of, give a man fish and he can eat for a day, teach a man to fish and, he can eat for a lifetime. And so I think now is a great time to allocate some time and some funds to teaching the community how to grow and prepare food. I think that we are seeing a resurgence in farming and gardening. Urban farming has picked up a lot of steam in recent years, and I think it will continue to do so, particularly during this time. And so I think that's an area that we can tap into where maybe education and food sourcing can kind of meet. There's like an intersection there. I think we can educate or continue to educate the community about growing their own food. And I think people just sometimes don't know where to start or how to get started. But I think there are enough people within the community who are familiar with the work and who have been doing that work It's just kind of tapping into those resources and getting someone, we need more organizers. We need more people on the ground level to kind of work together and get some of those things kicked off. I know there's also, organizations like Juice Orange Mound, and Brittany, I can't remember Brittany's last name, but she's doing some great work over in Orange Mound, and speaking about healthy food options and juicing and the importance of, people in our community getting nutrients that they need from healthy, fresh food. And so I think it's relying on those people in the community who are leading the way and are already doing that work, and kind of expanding on that in a way that can serve the community. And honestly, it's going to take a kind of a mentality shift from self in your own house to thinking about the entire community. I think sometimes, we have so many people who are capable and willing, but I think sometimes, to not necessarily to anybody's fault, we get so concerned with our own house. Like, is my house good? Is my house okay? Are my people okay? And if we are, then we're like, okay, well, we're good. But I mean, we have to become, or at least attempt to become, more community minded so that we can use the resources we have. We're in this place now where people want to be recognized, and people want awards, and people want to be seen. And so we're doing things to get those things, but we got to kind of get away from that and think about what's the right thing to do. What should we be doing? Not to be seen, not to be recognized on some list, not so that people can, give us some kind of accolades, but what is just the right thing to do?
As a friend of mine always says, to be impactful and not just impressive.
Right. That's it.
Yeah.
That's absolutely it.
I'm so glad to see this uprise in the farming from, where I work. There's a program where they're like getting ready to start a farm in certain communities within the city. And I remember my father, and this has been a few years back, telling me how much money was available, particularly for minority kids. I call them kids, to get into agriculture, and because the field of agriculture is only associated with, farming, and not necessarily that person that comes into the Kroger or the other big grocery stores to check the produce for certain things, or the engineer that tests the soil, or all the different aspects of it that they probably don't know. They have, steered away from going that direction when there's so much to be done in that field. And I even talked to my son about it. Of course, he didn't do it, but I just thought it was a great opportunity, because it was so much, so many opportunities available for children, minority children. Now, Trey, I know you don't have children, but when you were thinking through this whole thing, and you came up with the concept that, eventually this is where we're going to have to get back to. Did you even think through the part where, because I was just listening to Meredith, she was saying, hey, we usually just think about, are we okay? Is this a good fit for our personal situation? Were you trying to think through all aspects of it? Did you think about, the parenting piece of it?
Well, I thought about the parenting piece in concern as far as my classmates who have parents who are out of a job or who've been laid off time. Like y'all were talking about food security. I was thinking in that part of it, how would some of my classmates' parents be able to provide for them? And what could, and like I'm also my class treasurer, so I was also thinking about like what can we as a class do for our classmates or anybody who needs help, not just classmates but anyone. And so, and as you all were talking about the faith-based community, you see a lot of churches and religious officials and things like that. They're stepping out, and they've already been here, but this is the opportunity for them to really come out now. So you know.
Yeah. So we've talked about some of the challenges already, for the teachers, for the administrators and the students and the parents. I want to talk about the government's role in the process, whether we are in the, doing it virtually, whether we are in the classrooms, how we plan for, next steps. Um, in a more detailed manner, and I definitely want you to start that discussion for me, Civil. We're gonna talk about that. We're gonna take another break, and we will be right back on the Gospel Giant 94.7 FM. We're back on 94.7 FM, and we're talking about how we should approach school reentry, if we should go back. And I am going to ask Mrs. Watkins if you would speak to the government's role in this process. Um, in what ways do you think the government should be accommodating in this process, and why or why not? And if you would just follow Ms. Rucker, I would appreciate it.
Well, the first thing I believe that first we need a national plan and then we need a statewide plan. And both of those plans should be truly beefed out and fleshed out with our stakeholders. And those stakeholders are our educators. We can't have a plan about educating our students if we're not listening to the educators. But before we can get to the educators, we've also got to decide that we're going to follow the data, not what people feel and what they think, but data, because numbers are numbers. We have scientists and doctors who can inform these decisions. I think that we're attempting to allow our educators to become epidemiologists, which they're not. They're educators. So we can't force people into areas that they haven't been trained to do. Our educators educate, our scientists give us the science, and they provide us with data. So the first thing is we have to decide that we're going to have a statewide plan, that we're going to use the data, and we're going to bring stakeholders who actually have to deliver to the table. Then once we do that, we have to be willing to fund whatever it is that is the plan. So if we have to put more funding in getting our children into schools, well, that means, and I'm speaking from a school board perspective, what we found out was in order to clean the air, there was one thing that they were talking about, you have to clean the air, ventilation, and all of that. Well, those machines, to put them in our school district was like $850,000. That's one school district. So we're talking a real investment. So we've got to begin to invest into education. We've got to invest in our teachers, not just talk about paying them, but actually pay them what we're relative to what we're going to ask them to do. And once we do that, we have a statewide plan that gives every district, we have 147 school districts in our state, all 147 school districts behaving in the same manner will give our state the opportunity not only to keep our children safe, but it will keep our educators safe. Our children will be educated, our teachers will be paid, and if it includes finding a way for everyone to be virtual, then if we're going to do virtual, we've got to invest in rural broadband. We've got to expand our digital footprint. We've got to educate our children. I've had the opportunity to educate our children. I've homeschooled them. They've gone to private schools. They've attended public schools, which they do now, and I've also taught them virtually. The one thing about teaching a child virtually is that not only does a parent need to be secure in the ability to deliver and to come alongside a teacher as a learning partner, because it's not homeschooling if you're virtual and you have a teacher, it is educating your child at home as a learning partner with an educator. So not only do we have to make sure that those parents are safe and feel secure in educating their children along with their teacher, but we also have to give our students the tools in order to learn how to learn, because they've been learning how to learn in person. So now we've got to teach them and give them instructions on how to learn virtually. And it is different. And I will say this, it took my own children at least a month to get acclimated to being taught virtually. So we can't just believe that we're going to have our children back into school and however that's going to look. We also, as a state and as a government, have to plan on, if virtual is going to be the way that many of our districts are going to have to go, then we're also going to have to find a way to fund that type of educating as well. So it's funding, having a statewide plan, and making sure we involve our stakeholders.
Yeah, Meredith.
I agree. I think involving the stakeholders is critical. I think that it's also going to take some transparency on the part of the systems and our elected officials. I think a lot of people don't necessarily know where some of our dollars, our education dollars, are going. You know, if you're a regular citizen and you read about grants that come to the city, or you read about money that's coming to you know, our school systems, and you're like, oh, that sounds amazing, that's great. I know not too long ago, a couple of years ago, there was a lot in the news about, you know, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that donated a significant amount of money to our schools. But then it's like, you need, you know, as a taxpayer, you want to know, you know, where that money goes to. And it's not necessarily that it's not going where it should, or it's not doing, you know, the good that it needs to do, but you just don't know. So I think it takes some transparency in letting people know, like you said, like Sybil said, we need a plan, and letting, you know, the community know, and letting the stakeholders have some say in, you know, how we're reallocating dollars, and letting the community know what that reallocation looks like. So people can get on board. I do think that because we will be virtual, and there are some things operationally that we won't be spending money on because we will not be physically in some of these school buildings, that in my mind, you know, there should be some money available to reallocate into put into a different place. Now, I don't know if that's actually true, because you know, I'm not involved on that level. And so in my mind, I'm like, hey, well, there should be some money, you know, left, because we're not doing XYZ, or we're not, you know, inside a physical building. So, you know, there's maybe maintenance fees that we're not needing to pay, or maybe there's, you know, a reduction in, you know, electricity costs, or energy costs that we're not spending. So what's happening with that money? And so I think some education on how money is actually being spent, and then, like I said, in community, and the stakeholders on some ideas about how to reallocate those funds, will be critical. But I also think, you know, one of the things that I'll say that has been frustrating, is you know, kind of taking a reactionary approach, and I don't know whether that's because, you know, people didn't take things as seriously as they should have been. And I'm not saying that the school system has been reactionary. I think as a whole, our country has been reactive instead of proactive. As far as COVID is concerned, I do agree that we have not been relying on our medical officials like we should have been. You know, these are people who are educated, and this is their field, and this is their area of expertise. And I think that we should respect them as such, and listen to what they've been saying. And a lot of what they've been saying for several months. And so, you know, figuring out whether or not, you know, the students should be in the classroom or virtual should not be a decision being made in July and August. This should have been a decision that was made back in the spring. And so, you know, because when it gets into a time crunch, you know, educators and parents and administrators alike, it's stressful, because now you're feeling like you're having to being rushed into making a decision, when really I think we've had enough information, to make some of these decisions much earlier. And I think that could have also, helped with how we would fund and spend money and help prepare. And for example, like Sybil mentioned, helping prepare parents and educators for a transition to a virtual learning environment. And so my hope moving forward would be that, we would rely on those on medical experts. And people have different opinions about the media, and whether the media or whether the numbers are real, or however you want to look at it. But the fact of the matter is that we have medical professionals. We all know people who are on the front lines, who are going into these hospitals every day. We know what they're seeing. We know what they're experiencing. And I think we need
all
to
know
trust
people that are dying
them.
and sick from this virus,
Mhm.
Francine, from a teacher's perspective, when you think about those parents that, some that'll be working, we talked about that, but the ones that are just not, as Sybil said, as comfortable, with the whole process of trying to be a partner in educating their children. As a teacher, how do you suspect you will have to support those parents? I know you probably can't give me a concrete answer, but have you thought about what it may look like now? When the kids are coming into the classroom, and if you need to make some sideline time, for them and give them some extra support, that's one thing. But now they're not going to be with you. And, have you thought about that?
Well, yes. I mean, as a group of teachers, we thought about, how supportive is our district going to be, given that the state isn't very supportive. How is the district going to? Because I think my district has been pretty good about the school aspect, as best as they could.
Yeah.
But that was a real concern for us, especially being departmentalized as elementary teachers. You would have them all day, but being departmentalized, they go from class to class to class. And so we were thinking, like, what are we going to do? Because in the district, we even have some teachers who don't want to wear masks, who are rejecting that. But luckily, I was at a school that, I didn't have to deal with that. But we do have some parents that we heard of that did not want their kids to have on masks. And I was like, it was just as chaotic as you might think it would be, since the state and the federal government are just saying, everybody just pick and choose what you want to do. Mm-hmm. Every principal or chief of the school, just pick and choose. And that doesn't give us as teachers a lot of, it didn't make us feel very secure or valued or respected, because we have, some of us have health issues ourselves, like our immune system is down ourselves. So if you're letting a child or another teacher or somebody come in and not be protected, then how does that make, how would that make me feel? And a lot of my colleagues were rather upset about it. And, we were about to revolt. Like, what are we going to do?
I did not wrap my brain around, you guys are a very, and I really mean this, astute and intelligent panel. Help me wrap my brain around the whole idea of people saying, you can't make me wear a mask. And, I get it that, you may think it's uncomfortable. I get it that you may even think you can't catch something or whatever. I mean, if that's how you feel, but to take the risk, I mean, you don't know, none of us know for sure, right? Whether we would be exposed and contract the virus. And I would rather be safe than sorry. That's my bottom line, right? Is in what I'm trying to say here. And I just want somebody to help me understand, where are these people coming from? Is this a political stunt, what in the world is going on that people feel like they should not wear a mask or some protective coverings in the middle of a pandemic?
Or think it's, the government is some kind of conspiracy or they're trying to take your rights away. And I think the problem, with me, I think the problem is the same problem we've always had in America. There have always been spoiled people who thought that they were above everything and they didn't have to do anything, anybody. All the rules were for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And being in America, of course, all the rules, like my mother would say, the rules were not meant to be followed by everybody.
Mm-hmm.
That's not why that rule exists.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you go down, you speed up and down the road and you see, certain people speeding all the time, and yet they're not paying a ticket or anything like that. And then somebody jaywalking and they got to go to prison because they jaywalking. I mean, that's the disparity of that what we have in America. And then we have a climate of, we had a Black president. A lot of people are upset about that still. And that's why we got who we got right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that. And I think if you don't understand what's going on in the foundation of what's going on, everything else will confuse you. I think it's just a bunch of chaos because people don't want to admit how wrong and horrible their systems are, how horrible their institutions are, and how very un-American their institutions are. But they want to be patriotic, but their institutions are not patriotic. Their institutions are very harmful. And if you harm the least of these, then there's nothing. You're not about really much of anything. And there's nothing, and all of us have to pay for that. Yeah. We all have to pay for that because they're the dominant, thought. I really don't think they're the dominant people per se, but I think it's a popular thought. And I think that we have to speak up and speak out against that. And even if they are the mass majority, I don't think the majority always wins. I think there are a lot of times where, just sense wins. Sometimes good sense will win.
Mm-hmm. I see you, Sybil, and I see you, Meredith, and I'm going to come to you guys in just a second, but I just think this is a great segue into me just commending Trey on the work that he's done in his community. He's done a lot of work towards, equity and equality, and just, tearing down some of those barriers. So we thank you, young man. We thank you for being a voice. We really mean it. Yeah. So go ahead, Sybil. I saw you.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that our country has lost that thought that John Lewis had about the beloved community. And I heard someone today make a comment about a football coach, and his point was that we all need to be focusing on the name on the helmet and not the name on our jersey. So we need to be focused on what is best for our communities and not just us as individuals. But I do believe, as Francine said, that the climate has created that thought of it's about my name on my jersey and not the name on the helmet. We're not all on the same team. We're not all trying to create that beloved community, and we're not all being concerned. When we were growing up, it was about being my brother's keeper.
Yeah.
So I don't know that that type of sentiment exists in our country right now. And that's very sad, because what we do know is, once again, if you're asymptomatic and I'm standing next to you and I have any kind of comorbidity or a weakened immune system, then just speaking to you past 10 minutes could land me and everyone that I love, because we all I know of 3 families that are now dealing with the entire family is dealing with COVID-19. So, and that's another thing. How many people actually have someone or know someone who has either died or is now struggling with this disease? You don't believe fat meat is greasy.
Mm-hmm.
until it comes to your house.
Because you know, Civil, when we were growing up, these types of things, you know, this kind of stuff, you heard about it over in other countries, whatever, but it never hit home like it has now in our lifetimes. Yeah.
No, never.
Meredith?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with what Francine was saying. I think that unfortunately, the mask wearing has become politicized. And I think that, you know, because of some, you know, ignorance on behalf of our commander in chief and how he chose to, you know, present earlier on in this pandemic and how he continues to present, I think that there's a section of you know, the U.S. population that is very anti wearing masks, that is very anti you know, anything having to do with this virus being quote unquote real, because they are following, you know, the president's lead. If you support a president and that president does not wear a mask and he's saying that he doesn't think it's necessary, then, you know, you believe everything else that he says, you're going to believe that as well. And so I think that, again, to the point of entitlement and some people, you know, just not refusing to, you know, want to do certain things because they feel like their rights are being infringed upon. I do think that that's part of it. But I also find it very interesting that the same, you know, groups of people who are saying that, you know, wearing a mask is infringing on their rights are the same people who feel like the government should be involved in, you know, regulating a woman's body. And so I find it very curious. I find it, you know, just, you know, very interesting that, you know, putting a garment on your face for a certain amount of time that can protect you, your family, and your neighbors, you know, is offensive to you. But, you know, having the government be involved in you know, a woman's right and what kind of medical choices she makes for her body and her health care is something that, you know, they feel like should be regulated by the government. And so I just, unfortunately, it's become very politicized, and unfortunately, lack of following those guidelines from the CDC is causing, you know, serious outbreaks. We're seeing those super events. You know, I know a couple of families in Georgia, Albany, Georgia, a small city in Georgia was a location for, you know, relative to its size and population that saw extreme, you know, breakouts in several super events, where these events like weddings and funerals led to the death of several members of the family. I have a college classmate who, you know, lost her mother, lost her cousin, lost her aunt, you know, all to, you know, these super events. And so it's very difficult for people who have experienced it. Like you said, like Civil said, we all know people who, you know, have been battling it or who are going through it. And so when you see that firsthand, it's very difficult, and it becomes very frustrating when you see people who just so cavalier, just refuse to do their part and wear their mask. And so that also, I think, goes back to why so many people are concerned about sending, you know, their kids into the schools, because it's like, you know, even if you do everything and you do your part, if someone else chooses not to do their part, if someone else chooses to say, hey, I don't want my child wearing a mask, then it kind of makes you feel like you don't have control over the situation. And there's no way to necessarily mitigate, you know, whether or not, you know, students will contract COVID. And to Civil's other point, you know, it's not necessarily about the children. It's, you know, who do you live in the house with? You know, what other elders or people who help you with your childcare, people who are a part of your immediate family or your immediate community. It's like, these are the people that you have to consider. And so I think it makes it very, very difficult when, you know, we have people who are unwilling to participate because, you know, for political reasons or for, you know, lack of education or for ignorance, they're refusing to do their part.
Yeah. And there's no accountability whatsoever, because even though they want to control all these different things or whatever, you have to also consider the fact that look at some of the super events that they've had. Look at Herman Cain, you know, who just recently, and I mean, unfortunately, passed away from COVID. And you still just want to pretend it ain't so. I just cannot wrap my brain around that. I'm telling you. I want you guys to just offer some final thoughts as we move to a close. And let me just say again, thank you for taking some time to come and speak with me today. I thank you all. I thank you for your perspectives, great perspectives. And I hope that, what we've said, I've seen you post some things, to help families that may, need to educate their children at home, and some tips. That's great. I hope that, families and parents and students will have some great takeaways from this discussion today. So just give me some final thoughts as we move to a close. Trey?
Um,
Uh-oh.
well, my final thoughts are ability. That is a big, big piece of it all. We have to be willing to take accountability for taking the precautions, like, am I going to wear a mask? I need to wear a mask, making sure that you're washing your hands, doing things like that. And we just have to come together as not only a community, but a state, and just try to get COVID up out of here. I think that it'll take a lot of time. I think it'll take some time. A lot of, I don't want to say failures on government part, but I think it'll take some
Trial and
shortcuts,
error. Mm-hmm.
yeah, to get it up out. So I think that we'll be good. We just have to remember who God is as well. We have to keep him first in this fight. And so those are my ending thoughts on COVID and school and things like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, young man. My hat's off to you. You know I love you.
Thank you. I love you too.
Meredith?
I would just say, for a final thought, I think maybe with regards to the reopening of schools, just some compassion, and I think some grace towards all sides. I think, we can get very judgmental with each other about our decisions, and, sending our children into school versus keeping them at home versus, some of the decision that, school board officials are making. We're all navigating things that we've never had to navigate before. So I think we ought to give each other, a little bit of understanding and some grace during this time. I think on the upside, though, I really do think that we have an incredible opportunity to do some really new and creative and innovative things. And I hope that, we can all come to the table and use our collective talents to really make some huge innovations. This isn't about, what we want personally, or it's not about, our egos. This is about what's best for our children, and how we can best equip them to be the best, their most, strong, healthy, happy selves. And so I think that whatever we can do to come together and come up with the best solutions, for our children, and then equipping parents and educators with the tools and resources they need to facilitate that, is, I think, what we need to be focusing on.
Thank you. Francine?
Yes, my whole thing is, my final thoughts are, we have to be engaged politically the right way. We can't do anything without engaging in politics. We can't run a food bank. We can't run a school. We can't run down the road without politics being involved. All of that, our whole existence is what are the rules? And our rules are politics. So not just shouting politics, but actually being engaged and starting at the grassroots, the foundation, because nobody at the top can help you. They can shake down all the apples they want. If you don't have the right people down there allocating the apples to you, then you won't get the apples. Everybody else will get the apples. So we have to understand, we at our grassroots have to know our politicians, know the politics, know what's being passed, when it's being passed, how it's being passed, who's trying to pass it. We have to regulate our own household, our own rooms in the mansion have to be regulated.
Yeah.
So that's my final thought.
Thank you. Thank you. Sybil.
Well, my final thought is that we have to believe and remember that we are not individuals in this pandemic, that we are fighting a pandemic and not each other. And if we come to that conclusion and we come together and we realize that, as Ms. Meredith said, we have to have compassion and we have to extend grace, because none of us have lived through a pandemic. The other thing that I want to just bring to our forethought is that I had an 18-year-old graduate from high school. Do you know what that 18-year-old has seen since he's been born? The Twin Towers fell the year he was born. Graduated during a pandemic. He is going to attend college during a pandemic. He's going to have to vote in an election that will basically determine if he's going to have a life to live. So when we think about the pandemic and the opening of schools, once again, it can't be considered in a vacuum. We have to think about those parents that have lost their jobs. We got to think about Tennessee has the largest portion per capita of people who may be evicted because now eviction restrictions have been lifted. We have parents who now don't get the unemployment benefits that they got before. And our governor is making it challenging for us to share the $60 million to help our low-income families feed their children. So as Francine said, politics matter. Politics is your currency. So when you think about it, don't let anybody go in your pocket without your permission. And the way you give them permission is that you vote. So let's think about voting as our currency to make sure that we uplift not only ourselves, but our communities, our school systems, our educators, and everyone else that's attached to us. And if we begin to, once again, I keep going back to John Lewis. He's, it just had a profound effect on me. Let's get into some good trouble. Remember that we're a part of the beloved community.
Thank you so much. That says it all. I hope that our audience has some great takeaways. And I see you, Meredith. Come on, Meredith.
I was just applauding along with Trey. We were just applauding.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you guys again for being here today. I appreciate it. You've made this a very worthwhile discussion. I say to our listening audience, please support each other. Support each other. Pray for each other. Pray for our teachers, our students, our parents. Pray for our school leaders. Pray that people do see the importance, as Francine has pointed out, the importance of voting and getting out there and making your vote and your voice count, because I promise you, things are not going to start to brighten up until we understand the importance, and make sure you are voting in your local elections, your state elections, your federal elections. Don't just go and vote on November, 3rd or 4th or whatever it is, 3rd. Okay, y'all help me, because that's going to be the day our lives change. And, we got to vote in every aspect. Thank you again. I will see you guys again next Saturday at the same time at 2 p.m. on Dr. to Doctor in the chat room right here on 94.7 FM.